If you know your Nintendo games as much as I do, I'm sure you're pissed as I am with them for timelines. Zelda has 3 different timelines, and Breath of the Wild somewhere at the end, and it doesn't help that Nintendo themselves have told us that it's up to the player's imagination. Like, what the f***? And Mario's timeline has never really been puzzled together properly like we want it to. So, I've watched many other people try and piece together these games, but most of them come up with stupid solutions like leaving games out, or not really finishing with a full timeline. So, in this video I'll have to do what all these other cowards can't do, and today I'll be putting together the Zelda timeline. So in this list I'll be including all the mainline Zelda games that are counted as canon to the Legend of Zelda universe. So no, I won't be counting Hyrule Warriors, even though it would really help shove this timeline together. If you know anything about Zelda games and its timelines, is that it starts really simple, chronologically with Skyward Sword, in a floating island somewhere called Skyloft, I don't know where they come up with that, which existed before the Kingdom of Hyrule. And of course, before this game you have 3 goddesses which created everything, including the Triforce, the people, and the goddess Hyrule, which originally lived amongst the people. Before its game demise and the darkness was trapped away, and the spirit of the goddess Hylia and courage of the warrior was reborn through reincarnations of Link and Zelda. In this game, Demise is opened from its ancient seal, and one of his followers, Girahim, has stolen Zelda, which starts the main quest in the game, but turns into Link, or the player, having to reseal Demise away, while Demise curses the reincarnations of Link and Zelda with his hatred. Link just shrugs it off for now, and returns to Skyloft. Skyloft returns to the surface and forms Kingdom of Hyrule, which is present in almost every single game afterwards. The next game in the timeline doesn't really matter, it's the Minish Cap, and it was 100 years after the emergence of the Picorian Hyrule. Hyrule was hosting a fighting tournament, and the winner was Vati. He uses magic to succeed in the tournament, and then he brings back a bunch of monsters. Anyway, the next game ties directly to the previous one. This game starts Link and Zelda in the Sanctuary of a Blade, known as the Force Sword, that had sealed away the evil wind mage, Vati. Link draws the sword, and really none of this matters. It's when we get to the Ocarina of Time, which revolves around the Gerudo King and evil wizard Ganondorf rising to power, and the hero's quest to defeat him and bring back peace to Hyrule. Within this game, the tale of Ganondorf and the Triforce, and the hero that must travel to Hyrule Castle to meet the Princess Zelda, after which he dies. Now this is the game that f***s up everything. When Link is removing the Master Sword from the pedestal, he's not really meant to, so he falls into a deep sleep for 7 years, so when he wakes up he's old enough to really do it. During which, he opens the door to the Sacred Realm, so Ganondorf enters and attempts to take the Triforce. And in Triforce 101, if you don't have a balance of courage, wisdom, and power, then you can't take it. So therefore the Triforce splits, and Ganondorf only gets the Triforce of Power. So after Link wakes up from his 7-year little nap and realises he had to defeat Ganondorf, he starts his quest. And at the end of the game, when he finally does, or doesn't kill Ganon, Zelda either sends him back to relive his youth, or just keeps living on in the present. Nintendo decided to add a game with time travelling crap, and now the timeline splits into 3. Thanks Nintendo. Here are the 3 indefinite timelines after the Battle of Ocarina of Time. The Child Timeline, the Adult Timeline, and the Fallen Timeline. In the Child Timeline, Link takes his horse Epona and sets off after the events of Ocarina of Time and finds himself in a wacky forest that leads him into a parallel world, Termina. Unfortunately, Termina is going through a rough, weird time. The Skull Kid has the super powerful Majora's Mask and is going to cause a giant moon I definitely wouldn't want to see looking over me to crash into the earth, and he only has 72 hours to stop Skull Kid. So Link has to revive a bunch of Guardians and beat both Skull Kid and Majora's Mask itself. With no more creepy moon falling on top of them, the people of Termina have a festival and Link moves on to settle in Hyrule, become depressed, and no one remembers him. A century later, in the Twilight era, in Twilight Princess, Ganondorf is finally due to be executed. However, because Link returned to the future with the Triforce of Courage, the Triforce in this timeline split and gave Ganondorf the Triforce of Power, but this Ganondorf never touched the Triforce himself. He's not as powerful in any case. The ancient sages find they can't kill Ganondorf because of the Triforce piece. Ganondorf kills one of the sages, and instead the remaining sages send him to the Twilight Realm. Here he makes a new friend, Zant. Together they take over the Twilight Realm and they curse Midna, Twilight Princess, to become a little tiny thing. So Link turns into a wolf, he restores some light and finds the Master Sword in the Sacred Grove. Link beats Ganondorf and the Triforce of Power leaves Ganondorf, which means he actually dies, in this timeline anyway. Midna's curse is lifted and she returns to the Twilight Realm, smashing the mirror so the two realities could never socialise again. Several hundred years later, the era of the Shadow, Four Swords adventures, relations between Hyrule and the Gerudo finally become friendly, but then a new reincarnation of Ganondorf is born, with all the memories and thoughts of the previous one. The new Ganon wants to resurrect Vati, living it out inside of the Four Sword this whole time. So he steals the Dark Mirror and uses it to spawn a shadow version of Link. Sensing this evil, Zelda gathers real Link and the 6 Shrine Maidens to check on the seal, but the maidens and Zelda are swept away upon entering the sanctuary. So Link alone draws the Four Sword, creating 4 new friends, releasing Vati. Several Shrine Maiden rescues later, the Links head to the Tower of Winds, save Zelda and destroy both Potty. Well, that's just one branch of this whole timeline. That's right, kiddies, we have 2 more. The Adult Era, Link and Zelda defeat Ganon, and the 7 Sages seal him away in corrupted Sacred Realm. Triforce of Power. So in this timeline, Zelda sends Link back to his own timeline, to where all the Majora's Mask stuff happens. So let's explore the post-Ocarina of Time story that Link no longer exists, and Zelda returns the Master Sword to its pedestal, close to the Door of Time, so the Sacred Realm could never be reopened. The story of the hero of time becomes legend, much to the hero's own jealousy. I'm sure many years later, era without a hero, eventually Ganondorf's seal begins to weaken. He escapes, plunging Hyrule into darkness. Everyone prays the hero that will save them, but he never appears. Apparently not bothering to explore other options, the King of Hyrule trusts his kingdom to the gods in desperation. The gods tell certain citizens to escape the tallest mountains and torrential rain, so basically the gods flood Hyrule. This sends off the events of the Wind Waker, where Link's sister is stolen and he has to go save her. Pirate Zelda helps him retrieve her, then eventually they both kill Ganon. So after this, the Phantom Hourglass happens, and then a few irrelevant games later, which Spirit Tracks and Hyrule Fantasy, becomes the Adventure of Link, which was really not a great game, so we're not going to talk too much about that. Well, now that my least favourite timeline is out of the way, it's finally time to move on to the third timeline, which follows a darker possibility. Now that Ganondorf has actually defeated Link and he's obtained the whole Triforce from Link and Zelda, he transforms into Demon King Ganon. The 7 Sages seal Ganon and the full Triforce away in the Sacred Realm. Now that everyone knows about the Triforce and the Sacred Realm, no one puts the Master Sword back in this timeline though. The realm has been transformed into the Dark World by Ganon's evil heart, so anyone who enters turns into monsters. Conscripted into Ganon's army, eventually there are so many monsters they spill into Hyrule. The king orders the 7 Sages to seal the Sacred Realm entirely off. They succeed, but most of the Hylian Knights are killed. The imprisoning war ends, but it leaves Hyrule in shambles. The goddess-infused bloodline of the Hylians and the power of the sages begins to weaken. The era of light and dark. Linked to the past, despite this bleakness, uneventful mist reigns until a magical priest named Agony wants to break the seal. He brainwashes soldiers, kills the king, and sacrifices the descendants of the 7 Sages, sending them into the Dark World. Zelda, last to be sacrificed, emits a telepathic help, and is heard by Link and his uncle, the last surviving knights of Hyrule. Except Link's uncle is killed immediately upon entering the castle. So Link takes Zelda to safety. He finds the Master Sword surrounded by the Lost Woods. Agony discovers Zelda's hideout and sends her to the Dark World, officially breaking the Sage's seal. Link heads there as well. Link rescues the descendants, defeats Agony and Ganon, and finds Triforce. He uses it to wish for peace to be restored, thereby resurrecting the king and his uncle, and hands it to the royal family a few years later. Link's awakening starts to feel restless in its post-Ganon tranquility, so he goes on a sailing trip and lands on some funny island that he can't escape unless he wakes the Windfish up. On Koholint Island, he has to find 8 instruments to wake up the Windfish to get him off the island. Though it ends up being the Windfish's dream, and the island never actually existed. Thanks Link for killing all of the people on that island. Later, in the Oracle of Seasons and Ages, Link returns to Hyrule, hopefully with a heavy conscience, since the Twin Witches, Twin Rover, needs some special flames to resurrect Ganon so they can send Onyx to the Hollow Drum and Varen to the Labrina to wreak havoc. Link is sent back into the castle by the Triforce and it transports him to the Hollow Drum. He befriends Din, the dancer, aka the Oracle of Seasons Onyx, kidnaps her, throwing Holodrum Seasons into chaos, but Link defeats Onyx and moves on to the Laburnum. And Amp leaves him info. Baron possesses Nehru, the Oracle of Ages. She uses Nabor, whose time-traveling ability to go to the past possesses the Queen, and builds an ominous tower. But Link beats Baron and everything goes back to normal. Notice these oracles are named after the goddesses, and the Triforce itself put Link up to this coincidence. Probably not. Regardless, both the flames of destruction and despair have been lit. Twin Rover kidnaps Zelda as the sacrifice to ignite the final flame. Naturally, Link intervenes and kills Twin Rover, who sacrificed themselves to resurrect Ganon. But because the ritual was incomplete, Ganon comes back as a very, very stupid pig. Link Between Worlds, at some point, the Triforce is split apart. The Triforce of Power goes to Ganon, who's sealed away in the Dark World, and apparently not dead. It makes sense if the sages sealed away dummy Ganon, but anyway, centuries after Island Killer Link, the wizard Yuga shows up and turns all the descendants of the Seven Sages into paintings, including Zelda. He uses their power to release Ganon, and the two baddies become one, and rule Yuga's world Lorule. Thrown into chaos, Link becomes a blacksmith's apprentice. Lorule actually has its own Triforce, though his ancestors noticed that it consistently caused wars that destroyed it, but that made Lorule a permanently dreary land of monsters and darkness. Undistracted by sad tales, Link defeats Yuga and makes Hilda realize she's been a jerk. Hilda returns Link and Zelda to Hyrule's Sacred Realm, where they find the Triforce again. Link wishes for the restoration of Lorule's Triforce. A few years later, Triforce Heroes, which we're not really going to get into much, this game's Link decides to check out Hytopia, an incredibly fashion-conscious kingdom. His visit coincides with a dramatic situation, and then he has to defeat the baddie, and that's kind of it. Well, hold on there. You thought we're finished? We still have to unify these three stupid timelines so that we can have Breath of the Wild 2, and Age of Calamity. Now, most people just put this, at the end where the timelines unify, but I don't really see how that can work. What I'm thinking is that when Breath of the Wild takes place, it's hundreds or even thousands of years after the end of the three last timelines. This happens in every single timeline, so let's just leave them on the same timelines as three different timelines, which means this game is in three different timelines. So here we are, Age of Calamity. Ganon has been sealed away under Hyrule Castle for centuries, although Calamity Ganon seems to be rising up again. In Age of Calamity, which isn't actually a mainline Zelda game, but it's more of a hack-and-slash Dynasty Warrior game, Link and Zelda have to stop, or have to try and stop, Calamity Ganon from returning. Of course, in this game, the timeline doesn't directly go onto Breath of the Wild, but it does relate to it. This timeline splits again into the Age of Calamity's timeline and the Breath of the Wild's timeline. Age of Calamity timeline, there's this little egg robot, and he has to go find some other people from the future and bring them back to defeat Calamity Ganon, which means Breath of the Wild in this timeline never happened. Of course, there's another timeline that happened, which is 100 years before the Breath of the Wild, which is where all of the four champions died, and Zelda is trapped in the castle holding Calamity Ganon at bay. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild happens, and Link goes and defeats Ganon and the Divine Beast, release the spirits, and then that's all good. Of course, we have no idea what the Breath of the Wild 2 has in store. We assume that it's a direct sequel because that's exactly what they've said, but we have no idea what's going to take place. We're hoping that it's the rebuilding of Hyrule. We know that it has a lot of connection with the sky and expanding the very, very vast areas of Hyrule. Take a deep breath. That was a lot. After many, many games and some confusing timelines, with 3 split timelines and then splitting into Age of Calamity and Breath of the Wild at the end, this is a whole lot more than you'd think of a simple video game timeline. Well, that's all. I hope you enjoyed. like and subscribe for more.